Have you ever felt something was off about someone without knowing why? Maybe they smiled, said all the right things, and acted friendly, but deep down, something just didn't feel right. It's like your body sensed a threat that your mind couldn't explain. Carl Jung, a pioneer in psychology, noticed this pattern too. After working with people for decades, he discovered a quiet signal, something many of us miss, that can be more dangerous than obvious red flags like yelling, lying, or acting toxic. This danger doesn't come from what's said out loud. It comes from what's hidden. And the scary part? This signal often shows up in people who seem totally normal, kind, generous, even charming. So, what is this invisible red flag? And why do you need to withdraw immediately as soon as you detect it? Let's start with one of the most deceptive traps of the psyche called projection. Imagine a man who constantly complains that everyone around him is arrogant. He sees arrogance in his coworkers, in strangers on the street, even in his own children. But strangely, no one else seems to notice it. In fact, those same people often describe him as condescending, dismissive, hard to please. This is projection, a core concept in Jung's psychology. It happens when a person unconsciously rejects parts of themselves they don't want to acknowledge, anger, envy, pride, fear, and begins to see them out there in other people. Instead of saying, "I am angry," they feel that everyone else is hostile. Instead of admitting, "I want to be admired," they claim others are desperate for attention. Remember the character Severus Snape from Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Snape's harsh attitude towards Harry isn't just about what Harry does. It's because Harry reminds him of his own younger self, vulnerable, loving, yet trapped on a darker path. Snape's anger and resentment are actually projections of the pain and rejected parts inside himself. He hates in Harry what he cannot forgive within himself. Projection is sneaky because it feels real. You're not lying. You do feel judged. You do see selfishness. You do experience the world as unfair. But the source isn't always external. Often, it's the shadow speaking, the part of the psyche that holds everything we don't want to be. Jung warned that the more we ignore our shadow, the more power it gains over us. In his words, projection makes the whole world a replica of our own unknown face. And when someone becomes blind to their own darkness, they lose the ability to see others clearly. Relationships suffer, trust erodes, intimacy becomes impossible, because how can you love someone if all you see in them is what you fear in yourself? We all do this, to some degree. It's part of being human, but in its extreme form, projection can become dangerous, even violent. Entire ideologies have been built on it. Wars have started because one group projected its shadow onto another, calling them evil, immoral, inhuman. But in everyday life, projection isolates a person. They can't connect. They're trapped in a hall of mirrors, fighting ghosts of their own making. But what happens when someone not only rejects their darkness, but begins to believe they are the light? That's when projection turns into something far more seductive and far more dangerous: psychic inflation. We all want to be good, to do the right thing, to be on the right side of history, of morality, of life itself. But what happens when that desire becomes an identity? When someone starts to believe not just that they strive for goodness, but that they are goodness. This is what Jung called psychic inflation. When a person identifies with an idea or ideal so completely that they lose touch with their actual self, they begin to speak with the voice of truth, righteousness, even divinity. And in doing so, they become blind, not just to their flaws, but to the individuality of others. Think about Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars. Over time, Anakin becomes convinced he is the chosen one with a special mission. He identifies so strongly with this role that he loses the ability to question his own actions or doubts. This overwhelming certainty leads to his tragic fall, as his belief in his own righteousness destroys everything he once cared about. His inflation transforms him from a savior into a destroyer. Psychic inflation is everywhere. You see it in the influencer who preaches authenticity but curates every moment, in the activist who fights for justice while humiliating anyone who disagrees, in the spiritual guru who speaks of love but builds a cult around their own ego. It's tempting, this kind of power, because it doesn't feel like arrogance. It feels like purpose, like clarity. But Jung warned that it's one of the most dangerous psychological states a person can fall into. Why? Because inflated people stop listening. They no longer ask themselves, could I be wrong? Am I projecting? What am I not seeing? Instead, they become possessed by their own image, the perfect parent, the enlightened teacher, the moral warrior. They forget that they're still human. And in this forgetting, they lose humility, they lose curiosity, they lose relationship. Jung wrote, "The bigger the persona, the smaller the individual." And that's exactly the problem. The more inflated a person becomes, the more they believe they are something absolute, the less space there is for self-awareness, and the more likely they are to hurt others in the name of good. Psychic inflation doesn't look like madness. It often looks like leadership, like strength, like confidence. But underneath, there's a fragility, a terror of being ordinary, of being no one, of being wrong. And that fear of being no one pushes people toward another dangerous illusion, not into greatness, but into performance. Let's talk about what happens when someone doesn't just wear a mask, they become it. In public, he's confident, always smiling, well-dressed, articulate, agreeable. He never talks about his struggles, because he's the one others go to for advice. He plays the role so well that even he forgets it's a role. But when he's alone, something quietly unravels, a feeling of emptiness, a silent panic, a sense that maybe there's nothing underneath the mask. Jung called this mask the persona, the social face we wear to fit in, to be accepted, to function in the world. There's nothing inherently wrong with having one. We all do. It's necessary. But the danger arises when the persona stops being a tool and becomes our entire identity. Consider Don Draper from the TV series Mad Men. Don has carefully built a flawless public image, charming, successful, and desirable. But behind this mask lies a deep emptiness and a false narrative about who he really is. Over time, his persona becomes not just a role he plays, but the identity he loses himself in. He doesn't just wear the mask, he becomes the mask, forgetting who he was beneath it. When someone merges with their persona, they're no longer living, they're performing. They start to confuse approval with connection, applause with love, control with confidence. And underneath all of it, the real self, with its pain, doubt, vulnerability, gets buried alive. You've seen it before. The perfect mother who secretly resents her family. The successful executive who feels like a fraud. The good guy who never says no, never shows anger, and one day explodes. The longer someone hides behind the mask, the more pressure builds beneath it. Jung warned that when a person is too identified with their persona, they risk losing their soul. In his words, the persona is a system of behavior by which someone attempts to make a definite impression upon others, but it is only a mask of the collective psyche. And that mask is often a lie, not because the person is dishonest, but because they're afraid to be seen, afraid to not be liked, afraid to find out what's left when the performance ends. And the more perfect the persona, the more hollow the person often feels inside. They might seem functional, successful, even admirable, but if you listen closely, there's a quiet desperation underneath. But sometimes it's not just a mask someone wears. Sometimes they're overtaken by something much older, much deeper, a force that doesn't just hide the self, it replaces it. And that's when we enter the realm of archetypal possession. Imagine a man who believes he's been chosen, not metaphorically, literally, chosen to lead, to awaken others, to fight darkness. Every word he says is drenched in certainty, every doubt dismissed as weakness. You can feel it when he walks into a room, a kind of intensity, like he's playing out a myth that no one else can see. This is archetypal possession. When a person is overtaken by a powerful unconscious image, an archetype, and starts living not as an individual, but as a symbol. In the movie The Dark Knight, the Joker is more than just a criminal. He embodies chaos itself, the archetype of destruction and anarchy. By losing his personal history, he merges with this archetype, becoming a symbol rather than a person. He ceases to be himself and turns into a dangerous idea. According to Jung, archetypes are ancient patterns that live in the collective unconscious. The hero, the savior, the victim, the mother, the trickster. We all carry them. They guide our instincts, shape our stories, whisper into our dreams. But when someone becomes possessed by one, when they lose themselves in the role, it becomes dangerous. Because archetypes are not human, they are forces. And when someone becomes their vessel, they often stop behaving like a person. They become rigid, unquestioning. They speak in absolutes. They become the voice of truth, the chosen one, the righteous punisher. It sounds grand, but there's no room left for humility, or dialogue, or doubt. We see it in cult leaders who believe they're divine, in ideologues who think they're saving the world, and crush anyone who disagrees. Even in ordinary people, the mother who becomes nothing but the nurturer and loses herself, the boyfriend who becomes the protector and turns controlling, the friend who plays the martyr, always sacrificing, always silently resentful. When we're gripped by an archetype, we stop being us. We become a function, a projection of the collective mind. Jung wrote, "Possession by an archetype is always a danger when consciousness is inadequate." In other words, the less self-aware we are, the more likely we are to become puppets of something ancient and unconscious. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like devotion, passion, commitment. But underneath, there's no true choice, only compulsion. And here's the cruel irony. The more we try to escape our inner pain, by merging with ideals, with masks, with roles, the more we fall into one final trap. The trap of endlessly repeating what once hurt us the most. Imagine young woman Anna. She always dates the same kind of man, different names, different faces, but the same coldness, the same silence, the same slow erosion of her self-worth. Or imagine Tom. He keeps ending up in jobs where he's undervalued, micromanaged, dismissed, again and again. It's easy to call this bad luck, but what if it's not? What if it's something deeper, something unconscious, pulling the strings? Jung called it repetition compulsion, the mind's tendency to unconsciously recreate familiar pain, hoping, without realizing, to master it, fix it, or finally escape it. But the pattern doesn't break, it loops, quietly, in the background, rewinding our lives to the exact scenes we swore we'd never play again. Look at BoJack Horseman from the animated series BoJack Horseman. Time and again, BoJack sabotages his relationships and career, trapped in patterns of self-destruction. This compulsive repetition is his unconscious way of reliving childhood trauma, the feeling of rejection and loneliness he never resolved. He's caught in a loop of pain he knows too well, unable to break free. Why would anyone choose to repeat pain? They don't. That's the point. These repetitions are not decisions. They're defenses. A child ignored by their father might grow up craving unavailable partners, not because it feels good, but because it feels known, familiar, predictable, safe in its own twisted way. Jung believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. Repetition is the psyche's cry for healing, but healing never comes through reenactment. It comes through awareness, through finally seeing the loop for what it is, and stepping out of it. You can spot these loops everywhere. The woman who always ends up fixing others, the man who sabotages every chance at intimacy, the friend who's always used, always the victim, never the chooser. We keep reenacting because we don't know another way to live, because the pain, at some point, became our identity. And until we face it, until we bring it into the light, we're not really living, we're just repeating, rewinding, rebuilding the same prison, brick by brick. So, what do all these signs, projection, inflation, persona, possession, repetition, have in common? They all point to one thing, a personality that looks intact, but is quietly falling apart from the inside. And Jung had a warning about exactly that. So, what was Jung's ultimate warning? It wasn't about madness in the traditional sense, not psychosis, not neurosis, not eccentricity. The real red flag, in his eyes, was a personality that seemed too perfect, too consistent, too adapted, too sure. Because when everything looks right on the surface, when there are no visible cracks, that's often when the most dangerous fractures are hiding underneath. A person who always says the right things, who always appears kind, reasonable, rational, might not be whole. They might be split, severed from the parts of themselves they couldn't bear to face. And the more they reject those parts, the anger, the jealousy, the fear, the shame, the more those traits start to show up in other people, in projections, in enemies, in scapegoats. Jung saw this not just in individuals, but in society at large. He wrote, "The greatest danger to mankind comes not from the forces of nature, but from the psyche of the individual, from the power of unconscious contents when they are projected outward." That's how wars start. That's how hatred spreads. That's how we become convinced that evil is always out there, never within. The personality that seems most stable, most integrated, most adjusted, can actually be the most dissociated, the most inflated, the most possessed, because it's built on denial, not integration, on masks, not self-awareness. And that's the red flag. Not sadness, not doubt, not confusion. These are human, honest, alive. The red flag is a false wholeness, a carefully constructed self that hides every unacceptable emotion behind a wall of certainty, kindness, or control. The red flag is someone who doesn't look like they're struggling, but is deeply, invisibly. So the next time you meet someone who seems completely put together, or the next time you feel pressure to become that person yourself, remember Jung's words. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. And maybe the most dangerous personality is the one that looks too good to be true. If this video resonates with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to keep exploring insights from the greatest minds in history, hit the subscribe button and watch the next video. Let's stay together, because something truly important is coming in the next episode.